The Earfun Uboom versus the Tribit Stormbox. So I did buy myself the Tribit Max Sound Plus. I was really impressed with it for a small speaker. People said, oh wow, if you think that's nice, the Earfun Uboom has the same drivers. Ooh, but it's got a bit of a bigger bass and it's a 360-degree sound. I got it and I was a little bit disappointed. Gotta say, you know, disclaimer, I am not the biggest fan of 360-degree speakers because it doesn't suit my listening. They're all about off-axis listening, of course. But I did buy it. I was a little bit disappointed. As I said, that's my disclaimer. But, you know, it's not terrible. And you've got to remember, these are like £50 speakers. These are budget end speakers. Yes, you can get cheaper speakers, but most speakers are a hell of a lot more. And for the money, we're getting these value for money speakers that, you know, years ago would probably have been a £200 speaker. You're now getting good value packages. Now, along comes Tribit. They also saw my Max Sound Plus, which I paid for, and they said, would you like our other speakers, the Max Boom and the X Sound Go? And of course I said yes, because yes, I would like to compare all the speakers, which is what they asked me to do. And I did that. One of the speakers is a 360-degree speaker. It's the Stormbox, it's the Max Boom, it's the X Boom. Yes, they've had different names. It's all the same speaker. I believe the branding now is Stormbox, although my box still says Max Boom. And then I see on Amazon it still says Max Boom, but their website says Stormbox. I don't know what the final name will be. So I'm going to say it's the Stormbox versus the Earfun Uboom. There is a lot of interest out there. A lot of you do like 360-degree speakers. Obviously, you're on the go. You're not sitting in front of it. You're moving around and you just want a nice listen wherever you are in a room or wherever you happen to be. So I'm doing this comparison. Earfun Uboom versus Tribit Stormbox. I don't even know if it's Tribit or Tribit. I'm saying Tribit. First thing I want to get out of the way is the specs. Now, they are pretty similar. I will say, now they're saying same drivers in the Uboom that you get in the Max Sound Plus, which means the passive radiator and the main driver. But of course, clearly different passive radiators on the Stormbox, because they're JBL style at the end, whereas on the Earfun Uboom, the passive radiators are at the top end and then mid-sections are the two drivers. Obviously, when you're face on both of these speakers, face on, the drivers, main drivers, are to the sides, the left and right, and that's how you'd get your stereo. The difference being passive radiators firing down and up on the Stormbox, are still firing to the sides on the Earfun Uboom. Now, I've got to say, of course, bass is not directional. Not directional as in, of course, it travels in a direction. Your ears are not tuned to get the sense of direction from a bass sound in the same way as they are from the mids and the highs. In terms of specs, they're saying there's a 2,600 milliamp hour battery in the Stormbox versus the 2,200 milliamp hour battery in the Earfun Uboom. I'm not entirely convinced that actually is not a mistake that they've written in their specs, and that it is also not a 2,200 milliamp battery, because all the other speakers that these people are doing have a 2,200 milliamp battery, and when I test longevity of that battery life, it suggests it's 2,200. So I'm just telling you officially 2,600, but my hunch is they're both 2,200 milliamp hour batteries. So you're thinking, oh, okay, they probably have the same battery life. In my testing, I actually got an hour more out of the Earfun Uboom. So basically, 3 hours on absolute maximum volume for the Stormbox, getting on 3 hours 50, getting on for 4 hours from the Earfun Uboom. I do need to point out that was using indoor mode, which doesn't go quite as loud as the outdoor mode. When you have X bass on and X bass off on Stormbox, there isn't much difference when you get to the max volume between those different settings. So it's going to be a little bit different if you use the loudest mode, the outdoor mode, but I would imagine it was still going to be well over the 3 hours I get from my Stormbox. Obviously, budget speakers, they're both still using SBC codec only on the Bluetooth, but I must say it's Bluetooth 5 on the Earfun Uboom compared to 4.2. That may mean you have better connectivity from the Earfun Uboom, although I do see some complaints on both speakers. I haven't really had any problems myself. on either of these speakers, which both have stereo pairing. That's why I've got two of them, and I'll get onto that later. Yes, they both support wireless stereo pairing, TWS as they call it, but on paper, Bluetooth 5 may offer a stronger connection than the 4.2 on the Stormbox. USB-C on the Earfun Uboom, micro USB connection on the Stormbox. So in practice, they still both charge at 5 volts, 2 amps. So the charging time is not affected. It's just more convenient having a connection that it doesn't matter which way around you put it in. They are both rated at 24 watts maximum power. The Stormbox is actually slightly lighter, although in the hands I can't really notice that difference. However, we're talking 545 grams for the Stormbox, 585 grams on the Uboom. In my hands, it feels exactly the same. Now, interestingly, they are both IPX7 rated. That means drop it in up to 1 meter of water for up to 30 minutes and your speaker is going to still sound like it did before once it's dried. But does it float? This is the thing. It's not much use if it's, you know, floating to the bottom as we get with some of the JBL speakers. So do they float? And if they float, are they still listenable? In other words, do they float with the drivers facing above the surface of the water? So it was a surprise to me that the Stormbox actually, you know, which is a great thing to have. Even if it's floating in a pool, you can actually listen to it in a reasonably enjoyable way. You still get the smash sound, but you can hear a clear sound from the Stormbox. Whereas the Earfun, because it floats face up and both the drivers are on the sides, they are submerged. So in terms of if you actually want to have it in the sea or the pool, the Stormbox is a better option there. As I said, they all seem to have very similar specs, and so the only difference is obvious is that it's not the same passive radiator. However, they are both 45mm main drivers, and I assume the same driver. And that pretty much wraps up the specs. As I said, in terms of modes, you've got different modes. So you've got an X-Bass mode on your Stormbox. That's X-Bass on, which is, if I turn it on, you'll see what I mean. It has a dedicated X-Bass, which is a bass boost, and it really does boost the bass. I'm not sure if that's going to connect or not, because I've only got one of them set up to connect at the moment. But if I turn on that bass, X-Bass button, you can see it just lights up white, and you turn it off again if you don't want the X-Bass on. It is a bass boost. Whereas on the Earfun Uboom, if I turn that on, you have what they don't call it X-Bass or bass boost, they call it indoor and outdoor. But in normal language, that means indoor mode is a bass heavy mode, outdoor mode is a high-end heavy mode. So there isn't really a flat mode. It's either bass heavy or a high-end mode, high-end treble heavy, you know, so giving extra clarity, but you're losing on the bass. This has got a weird little white light, which doesn't, I'm not sure what that's supposed to signify. But that, if the light's on, it's outdoor. If I turn that off, that's now indoor mode. So, yes. You've got different modes on these speakers and all different ways of listening to the driver. It makes it really hard to do real A-B comparisons. I will attempt that. So my first test is 60% volume. Now, I will say, and I'll get onto that later, they don't play in the same linear fashion on the volume scale. So most of the way up, and depending on which mode you're in, the Earfun is playing noticeably louder at each volume step than the Stormbox. So, in this first test, they are normalized to same sound pressure levels to give you an impression when they're matched exactly how they will sound. Just bear in mind that if you're doing the normal, I'm on Android, if you've got the normal 15 Android volume steps, which of course you can change, but if you're on the normal standard 15 steps, you're never going to properly volume match them because they're out of step with each other. 60% volume.
No matter distance I cover, you always there. Just my door, please let me find another. Feels like you're my silhouette. I'm not easy to forget. Pretend that we never met. I'm trying to keep my cool. I sing, but your colors shining through. Yeah, I do. That I do. Is it too much to ask? I don't want you back. I don't want you back. Is it too much to ask? I don't want you back. I don't want you back.
Oh, you came and tucked your way into my heart. Oh, you look at me in ways I never loved. With you I know that this is all, so I don't need to take it slow. If you want me, then I believe that there's a simple remedy. We don't need no miracle. I think we've seen it all. Just make the call. I'll come running over. We don't need no miracle. It's unconditional. Just make the call, and I'll be yours. I'll come running over. We don't need no miracle. It's unconditional. Just make the call, and I'll be yours.
Uboom, outdoor mode, Stormbox, no X bass mode. These are the non-bass boost modes at 6% volume and they're normalized to same perceivable sound levels. What you get, Uboom clearly brighter, quite boosted to 7 to 8,000 Hz, around 2 decibels louder in its bass peak, around 65 Hz. Stormbox, though, is a little bit deeper in the bass, at 50 Hz minus 33, Uboom 50 Hz just under minus 36. So Stormbox a bit more rounded but less clear, although the outdoor mode Uboom is a little bit boosted in the high end, which exaggerates that clarity. Uboom indoor mode, Stormbox X bass mode. These are the bass boost modes. Minus 14.5 Uboom, minus 15.6. So about a decibel louder in the bass when normalized on the Uboom, and still a bit clearer because it has that big peak around the 7 to 8,000 Hz. Stormbox a bit more rounded. Again, you can clearly see here, goes a little bit deeper at 60 Hz, minus 19. 60 Hz on the Uboom, just under minus 21. So a bigger peak on the Uboom, but a bit more rounded on the Stormbox. But the Uboom always sounds clearer because it does have a high-end boost, which you may or may not like, and overall it sounds a bit thinner. So they are quite similar when you volume match them, you know, when you exactly volume match them. However, there are differences that will remain throughout the testing, and they are. If you're listening A/B, the Stormbox is going to sound a bit dull because it hasn't got that high-end clarity. But remember that the Earfun Uboom has a high-end lift, so it's not a natural high-end, and depending on your listening taste and what you're listening to, it can be a little bit fatiguing if you're listening to bright sounding recordings. But if you value clarity, you're going to like that high-end. If you don't do an A/B comparison, to me, I'm kind of sitting there thinking, oh, the Stormbox sounds a bit more balanced. But I do admit, when I have them next to each other, the Earfun makes it sound a bit dull. But it's also a little bit leaner sounding, the Earfun Uboom. And of course, there's a difference between if I've got it in outdoor and indoor mode. But I'm just saying, in some ways, some of these tests are a little bit unfair because in AB, given the Stormbox is a little bit more realistically tuned, whereas this has a lot of clarity. But that's not a bad thing, and a 360-degree speaker, because as you move off axis, a normal high-end lift will suddenly become a normal sounding, a flatter sounding response when you're off axis. So it's very hard to really get a grasp of a 360-degree speaker, I think, in AB comparisons like this. So anyway, listening from the sides, I will point out that it doesn't matter which side I listen to from the Earfun Uboom, sounds the same. On the Stormbox, they're different. You've got the battery on the left side if you look face on. So that driver is at the top, whereas on the other side, the driver's in the middle. And this has a high-end lift on the left-hand side driver that's missing on the mid driver. So they don't sound the same. So I'll try and get that over in this side listening test. There's only one way to listen side on. It sounds the same on the Uboom. It's going to sound different depending which side you're on the Stormbox. And I will say, whereas the last test was normalized the same sound pressure levels to give you a realistic comparison that, you know, if you're at the same volume on each of them, I'm leaving these at relative volumes. So part of the difference you will hear is simply because Uboom plays louder at the same volume step, certainly at 60%, than the Stormbox. So on the Stormbox, it makes a difference which side you're listening to. On the left-hand side, you have the driver which is placed at the top of the speaker. On the right-hand side, if you're looking at the face on, you have the driver that's in the middle. The top driver plays noticeably clearer, higher than the mid driver. Look at that bass, look at that boost around 13,000 hertz, which is missing on the mid driver, but then the top driver has a bit of a gap, 7,000 to 13,000 hertz. Which you don't have on the mid driver. So they play different. So it makes a difference which side you listen on, which isn't the case with the Uboom, which is the same either side. So both in non-bass boosted mode, ultimately Uboom, as always, sounds clearer but thinner and has a bigger bass when I'm not volume adjusting. So these are both played at 60% without any adjustments made. The Uboom plays louder at these volumes, so 2.5 decibels louder in the bass. Because of that, but the Stormbox, you can still see, doesn't have the bass peak, but it has a little bit more of a rounded bass. If I'm looking at the 60 hertz mark, just under -27, Uboom nearly -30. So they play different in the bass. In bass boost mode, X bass versus indoor mode, again, mid driver playing different to the top driver, which is much sharper, much clearer sounding, but more boosted. And then compared to the Uboom, Uboom still has more gain on at the high end. It still sounds clearer and sharper, about 3 decibels louder in the bass, listening side on. But as I said, Stormbox has a more rounded, deeper bass, 60 hertz, again, -27. So without adjusting the volumes, playing them both at 60%, Uboom indoor mode, bigger bass, a bit clearer, a bit louder. Okay, I'm saying they play different at different volume steps, but you know, when push comes to shove, pushing them to the limit, what do you get?
Way easy. I never thought you'd be the one. I never meant to take your heart. I never felt so hard. I never meant to be the one. I never thought I'd break your heart. You and me, we both live life at full speed.
So ultimately, pushed to the max, Uboom plays louder than the Stormbox. Although the peaks are almost the same, there's more going on across the frequency range with the Uboom, which is the average figure. This is non-bass boost mode, so no X-bass and outdoor mode on the Uboom. Again, the Stormbox does have a bit more of a rounded bass, so while Uboom is stronger at the bass peaks, minus 77, by over a decibel. If you pick the 50 Hz mark, minus 39, minus 45. So the Stormbox just goes a bit deeper. But the Uboom noticeably louder, noticeably clearer. And same in bass boost mode, extra bass, indoor mode being the bass mode, again much louder on by a decibel on average for the Uboom. Well, again the peaks are almost the same, but slightly louder on the indoor mode Uboom. And nearly 2 decibels louder bass peak for the Uboom. It's only when you go quite deep, say 50 Hz again, minus 39, minus 41-ish, that the Stormbox makes up for its lack of bass peak. But if you're going to play it max, you're going to notice the Uboom sounds louder, sounds clearer. So you notice, this is the thing with a lot of these speakers that have a bass boost mode, but they all have a bass limit. There is a decibel point at which they will not give you any more bass. I know people talk about the bass rolling off. It's not really rolling off. It's just that as you go up the volume scale, most of the frequency range is still getting a boost, but the bass is limited to a maximum dB limit. Now, it does mean that because of that, the loudness and how they play at lower volumes is going to be different at the higher volumes. So I do think it's interesting to see if you're playing in one particular mode or comparing it to another mode and saying, right, I'm going to stick with that, how they change over the volume scale, as I said, because it's not linear, simply, not for many factors, not least because the bass is going to get limited to a certain level. So just out of my own personal interest, this is what those volume scales actually amount to. So we know the Uboom plays louder for each volume step, but I thought it was interesting to see what happens as you go towards the max. A lot of these speakers roll off at the top, and they're not actually that much louder than the speaker you're A being with. It's just that the volume scale is different. In this case, as you can see at low volume, the Stormbox with its X-bass on is pretty close to the Uboom in its indoor mode. But once you hit 80% and above, and the bass is limiting, it ends up being, in terms of max decibels, the quietest at maximum volume. It's rolling off pretty steeply, in other words. And the Stormbox, in its normal mode, no X-bass on, which is significantly quieter for each volume step, ends up being a little bit louder in sheer max terms from about 80% onwards. Again with the Uboom, once you hit the Uboom's indoor mode limit for its bass, around 70%, the outdoor mode becomes the loudest mode. Below that, the indoor mode is louder. So I've covered most of what, I think is going to be of interest to most of you guys. However, the most glaring omission so far is that they're stereo speakers. You're going to buy them because, well, you may be buying them because you can pair a pair of them together. And I haven't played them as a stereo pair yet. So 60% again as a stereo pair. A-B against each other.
Always hanging by your phone. Do I even know you? And I get paranoid sometimes, 'cause I know that you ain't mine, and I'm lost without you. You still be the one I talk to when I'm sad. Can't you see now tainted love is all we had? Our issues run so deep, and when I try to sleep, I feel so bad. I should leave, and by the time it's done, I'll be gone.
I'm on my own, broken alone. I feel the rain crashing down all around this empty town. I'm searching for the lost and found, but you don't care, you're unaware. Keep moving like the scars aren't even there. It's in the air like a blazing flare. Don't stare 'cause the flames will burn us. I thought you were the one for me. That's why I give
pain was over. Keep you warm by the roaring sea. You meant the world to me.
So they do play nicely in stereo, as most of these speakers tend to do. They do come live when you play them as a stereo pair. Probably the Stormbox benefits most because it doesn't have that high-end lift. So you do get, you know, that what I call a little bit of sparkle when you start putting them in pairs, especially as you get a little bit of that, that phase difference, which is, I think, quite nice on the ear. So it adds a little bit of sparkle that's missing if you only have a single Stormbox, whereas, you know, the Uboom is quite sparkly anyway because of its tuning. I would say when I do these A comparisons, and if I hadn't heard the speakers before, I would probably be thinking, yeah, all right, the Uboom sounds a bit more exciting, a bit clearer. But I have to say, when I living with them, Stormbox sounds a bit more real-world tuning. It sounds a bit more balanced, and although it's the clarity of the Uboom that hits you straight away, you do get a sense of thinness and some things not being quite right in the tuning. There are more dips in the tuning than you're getting with Stormbox. It is a flatter frequency response. Obviously, we're not talking hi-fi with either of them. We're not talking amazing flat frequency with bass, you know, down to 20 hertz. Bear in mind, they're £50 speakers, $50 wherever you are. However, against each other, I just want to point out that living with them, I still think the Stormbox, not least also because I prefer the form factor. Maybe it's I'm used to JBL, but it feels more usable. I can do it that way around, where this cylindrical shape doesn't, yeah, I mean, not a 360-degree fan anyway, but the fact that cylindrical doesn't lend itself to, you know, more options than, you know, this, I don't know, oblong kind of shape does. I've got a little bit of water because it's still wet from my testing to see if it floats or not. So I've not had some major accident or leak in my roof. It's from the water testing. So I hope you got something out of that. If you're trying to decide between the two, that is between a thinner, clearer sound on the Uboom, a little bit thicker. The basses are a bit similar, but you do get more bass slam on the Uboom. But in the real world, whether you notice these differences without hearing them close the AB, I don't know. But I would say also, neither of them connect very quickly. I'm used to having a quick connect, you know, you turn my speaker on and within a few seconds, there is a noticeable lag on both of these speakers connecting. Not a big deal, I'm just saying I noticed it was there. So I hope you got something out of this comparison and thank you for watching.
UK